Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Okay, so we're coming off of, on the weekend, we took a look at the concept of papancha, which shows up in the Honeyball Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 18, as papancha sanya sankha, specifically this part of the mind which receives, knows a perception. It is seeing the world through perception, but tries to develop that perception. And this can be from greed, like we're trying to reflect on the good qualities of something that we like. It can be through hatred. We're trying to drum up negative thoughts about something that we've formed an opinion it's a bad thing. Or it can even be for the sake of delusion. We're just nurturing a cloudy, speculative, randomized pattern of thoughts. Why? Well, anything to be here, right? Sometimes we just want to zone out. And so we can even be attached to our sort of bored and listless thinking. We want distraction. And this is papancha, but it's one thing we want to be careful to do, even though we have the Pali Canon, we have all these wonderful lists, all these great ways of explaining things, is we don't want to be too reductive. Because if we look at our mind, we know immediately this is not simple. There is no way there's going to be like one easy explanation for what's going on here. And Papancha just doesn't explain all of the thoughts and all of the compulsions and all of the stickiness and craving and confusion that goes on in our mind. And it's not designed to, really. It's describing something kind of specific. And this is when we have a discrete idea and our mind is kind of looping back to this idea. And we might do it for a short period of time, or we might do it for quite a while. If we get in an argument, we might find ourselves looping back to this particular perception around the argument and how wrong that person was and how right we were. We might nurse that for hours or days if we're really, really practiced in this. But it's not to say that all thinking comes from this. Yeah. But what do we do? What do you do with the situation? In the afternoon of the day long, we looked at Majjhima Nikaya number 19, the next sutta, which coincidentally is how the Buddha related to this, how the Buddha responded to this. Once he noticed this was going on, and even before he was enlightened, when he was like us, when he was trying to figure out how to get there, how to get his mind free, he realized he could divide his thoughts into categories. And having done so, he could decide what category of thoughts he wanted to develop and which ones he wanted to abandon. And very surprisingly, because he could have come up with 4 categories or 7 categories or 14 categories, he liked lists. But very surprisingly, it all boiled down to just 2 categories. And he wasn't yet enlightened. He didn't know why this was happening, but it was that simple. There was a category of thoughts that were pleasant, that were kind, that didn't lead to this proliferation, that didn't lead to elaboration, that just kind of like were contented and settled and we're happy with being their own thought. And ultimately, what he figured out later is they all are thoughts that are selfless. They're all thoughts that to some degree don't play into ignorance, which is a basic condition that causes all of our problems. Yeah. And then there's the second category, and it's all the ones that play into ignorance. And surprisingly, they all shared this big package of characteristics. They're kind of unpleasant. They're kind of compulsive. They make craving worse, not better. They lead to the next thought. They're not sufficient in and of themselves. It's almost like they're hungry. They're wanting more and more and more. And they tend to be unwholesome. They tend to lead to immorality, all kinds of things. And he's like, wow, they they all share those characteristics. And so once he started listening to his thoughts and he started putting them in categories. And once he had kind of gotten a sense for the contents of his general train of thoughts, he's like, okay, we're going to abandon all the ones in the bad category. And we're going to intentionally try to think all the ones in the good category. And he said this was wonderful. And it led to incredible brightness and energy in the mind, unwavering mindfulness. Um, but we ourselves are not necessarily, I'm not going to say categorically, all of us, but most of us are probably not bodhisattvas. We're probably not just inches away from complete Sammasambuddha enlightenment. Yeah. And so it might be a little harder than, you know what, I'm going to divide all my thoughts into two categories and I'm going to just going to have good thoughts. It might not be that clear of a situation for us, even though there's all of these characteristics we can look for, like wholesome, energizing, undistracted, contented, selfless, kind, generous. Even though there's all these qualities, still sometimes we might have a thought and we're like, I'm not sure where you go. There's only two piles, but I don't want to put you in the wrong pile. Yeah. And sometimes this is like this. Sometimes we're having thoughts and it's not like papancha, like big intentional building on something thoughts. Sometimes they're just thoughts. Sometimes the whole brain matter is just firing some neurons because it's alive. It wants to work, it wants to do stuff. Maybe some good will come of it. Maybe it'll help us solve a problem, or maybe it'll help us anticipate a problem, or maybe it'll create a problem. But our mind doesn't seem to be so worried about that. It's not as worried as it should be, right? But it does this, and sometimes it's got thoughts. And sometimes the only problem with these seemingly random thoughts is that we identify with them. But that in and of itself is enough to make them dukkha. We think there are thoughts. We think we did them. We think they were a reflection of us. Yeah, there's some part of the whole that we think is in there somewhere. We're not sure where the center of it is. We're not sure what it's composed of, but we're pretty sure we exist, probably, and that these thoughts are part of us, like our fingers or our toes or our arms, our feet. But if we really watch, they're just thoughts. Yeah, they come and they go. It's like weather. The only categorical thing you can say about the weather and always be accurate is it will change. Yeah. This is the only constant in constancy. And that's reliable. And the same thing we can say about our thoughts. We might be having an angry thought right now, but it will not be forever. Soon that mood will pass. And we might be having a pleasant thought. We might even be having a wholesome thought. We don't know. But we can know that it will change eventually. We can't keep it going indefinitely. All things change. So we've got all these restless thoughts and we're not bodhisattvas. So we could use some strategies. And as it turns out, if we are just flipping through the Majjhima Nikaya, just seeing what gems we might discover, Majjhima Nikaya 20 is not just 19. It's not just the Buddha's solution to the problem of categorizing and deciding what thoughts he's going to have, but is actually the Buddha saying, okay, look, here's some things you can do if you see that your mind is thinking, thoughts are coming up and it's not going in the right direction. there are strategies, and he offers these 5 strategies for how you can step down and eliminate, abandon restless thinking. Direct yourself from the sort of papancha, the elaboration, the random, the one thought leads to the next thought, leads to the next thought, and move into the category of you have a thought and it's sufficient in itself and it ceases. And there's a gap. You don't immediately need the next thought. Yeah. And you can start doing what the Buddha says, vitaka, which is intentionally directing the mind towards a subject, which is intentional. And though it might still be a little tiring, it's not you, but it builds to something. It can build to samadhi. So we'll start with Majjhima Nikaya 20. And what I'll do is I'll read the 5 strategies that the Buddha gives. And then we'll go back and we'll look at each one with its simile, and I'll say a little bit about it. So first we'll have the suttas. So the Buddha says, thus I have heard at one time the Buddha was staying in Savatthi in the Jeta's Grove in Anathapindika's monastery. There the Buddha addressed the monks. Monks, Venerable Sir, they replied, and the Buddha said this, mendicants, a mendicant committed to the higher mind should focus on 5 subjects from time to time. What 5? And he's saying, so if you're going to direct your mind, these are the 5 strategies, yeah? Say that a monk is focusing on some subject that gives rise to bad, unskillful thoughts connected with desire, hate, and delusion. That mendicant, that monk, should focus on some other subject connected with the skillful. Doing so, those bad thoughts are given up and come to an end. Their mind becomes stilled internally, it settles, unifies, and becomes immersed in samadhi. And this is the first strategy. If we find that we're thinking unskillful thoughts, distracted thoughts, unwholesome, immoral thoughts, then we should intentionally think skillful thoughts, direct the mind in this direction. Now, suppose the mendicant is focusing on subjects connected with the skillful, but bad, unskillful thoughts connected with desire, hate, and delusion still keep coming up. They should examine the drawbacks of these unwholesome thoughts. So, these thoughts are unskillful, they're blameworthy, and they will result in suffering. Doing so, reflecting on the bad thoughts in this way, they are given up and come to an end. Thus, their mind becomes stilled internally, it settles, unifies, and becomes immersed in samadhi. This is the second strategy. Suppose that mendicant is examining the drawbacks of their unwholesome thoughts, but bad, unskillful thoughts connected with desire, hate, and delusion still keep coming up. They should try to forget and ignore them. Doing so, the bad thoughts are given up and come to an end. Their mind becomes stilled internally, it settles, unifies, and becomes immersed in samadhi. This is the third strategy. Now, suppose the mendicant is intentionally ignoring and forgetting about these thoughts, but bad, unskillful thoughts connected with desire, hate, and delusion keep coming up. They should focus on stopping the formation of those thoughts. Doing so, the bad thoughts may be given up and come to an end, and their mind becomes stilled internally. It will settle, unify, and become immersed in samadhi. This is the fourth strategy. Now, suppose that mendicant is focusing on stopping the formation of thoughts, but bad, unskillful thoughts connected to desire, hate, and delusion still keep coming up. Then, with teeth clenched and tongue pressed firmly against the roof of their mouth, they should squeeze, squash, and crush mind with mind. Doing so, the bad thoughts may be given up and come to an end. Their mind may become stilled internally, settled, unified, and immersed in samadhi. Yeah. So these are our 5 strategies. People are usually like, wait, what's that 5th one? But yes, we'll get there. So five simple strategies. And very intentionally, the Buddha has started with the most subtle, useful, and if possible, most successful strategy. So let us consider this first strategy, which is when we notice that we're having thoughts in the unskillful category, we should direct our mind towards skillful thoughts. And the Buddha uses a simile. He says it's like a deft carpenter or their apprentice who'd knock out a large peg with a finer peg, or a coarse peg with a finer peg. And this is, I mean, this is a fairly esoteric carpentry point. But back in the Buddhist day, maybe they didn't have all the shop tools and stuff. Yeah, things were kind of rough. They maybe didn't have wood glue. If they were going to put together a piece of furniture, what they would do is they would set it up and they would get the boards in place. But to get the pieces to stick together, they would knock in some pegs. But unfortunately, the first time you do this, because everything's still all rough and not shaped, and you're still going to be wobbling it as you get the other pieces in, that first peg is probably going to crack. It's going to chip. It's going to get stained. That peg is going to end up looking ugly, and it will continue to look ugly even when the piece is finished. So what you do is first you get the whole chair or table or whatever it is put together, kind of, stacked up like a little set. And then you go back and you knock out you use cheap pegs to do it. And then you go back and you knock out those cheap pegs with pegs made of the finished material, good high quality pegs that will match, the wood that you're using for the piece of furniture. And this is exactly what the Buddha is suggesting to do with our mind. We're starting out and mindfulness arises and we see the thoughts that are arising in our mind, and we're like, hey, these are bad thoughts. I don't want to keep going on this line of thinking. So if you've ever tried, you notice that you're thinking unwholesome thoughts, and then you're like, you know what, I'm not going to be angry at that guy, I'm going to practice metta. Yeah, you're like, I'm going to have kind thoughts about them. It's not easy, is it? It's not, I mean, but the simile of hammering in a slightly finer, more refined peg, it might actually be kind of on the nose. Yeah, because it takes effort, but it's a worthwhile effort. And it's not necessarily that we're immediately going to go from a completely distracted, dispersed, crazy, angry state of mind to beatific, in love with everything, selfless, joyful. Oh, the clouds have parted and everything's good. We might not be able to do this with one deft stroke, yeah? But what we might see is possible, and this is why this is the first one, it's the most effective one, and this is what skilled meditators actually do, yeah, is they get some semblance of wholesomeness in their mind, wherever they can find it, however they can reach it, wherever it is to be found, yeah. And then they step that up gradually to more and more refined, wholesome states of mind until they're in a completely wholesome state of mind. And from there, they're back in control of their minds. They're back able to make decisions about, what subjects they want to focus on and what thoughts they want to cultivate. Yeah. So say here, because this is the thing, we can only think one thought at a time. Yeah. So if we say we have generosity, right? Generosity is a good thing. But if we're feeling stingy, we're not going to be able to go to feeling completely generous, like open-handed, open-hearted, take whatever you want. It's going to be hard to transition immediately from that. But maybe we just won't be averse to sharing. Yeah. And so the thing is, if we notice we have a controlling, unwholesome, distracted, restless kind of mind, that very mind can't critique itself and skillfully select a wholesome thought. That compulsive, controlling mind is not capable of doing that. What we have to do is we have to let a wholesome thought in. Basically, we have to notice something that is wholesome and sort of relax into it. Yeah. So anything that's available to us that is not unwholesome, any kind of skillful thought we can have is going to be good enough. It's going to help us get this process started. So, we're really nursing a grudge against somebody, and then that very same person is, oh, can you pass the sugar? And without even thinking, you like pass them the sugar. Yeah. Because I mean, you're just not cultivating stinginess. You just say, okay, yeah, yeah, here you go. You're not taking possession of it. You're not being assertive. You're not just like, I'm not going to help you. You're just like, oh, yeah, yeah. You don't even think about it. Before you know it, you're like looking at your hand and you're like, how dare you? You betrayed me. Who are you working for? I thought we were on the same side. But you've gone from an angry, closed off thought to a simple one, sharing. Oh, yeah, yeah, here, let me help you. And it's not like you've immediately abandoned all selfish thinking. It's not you've completely given up your grudge. You've just stepped over to one slightly less unwholesome line of thinking. But while there might still be a bit of selfishness and distrust towards that person, you might still have the underpinnings of a mood of ill will. That one thought you just had of sharing, it doesn't nurture it. Yeah. And so you're like, okay, wait, I've seen an opportunity. Yeah. And so rather than thinking, I'm going to have all sorts of friendliness and goodwill to this person who's like, oh, okay, I'm able to share with this person. Look, I can share the air. We can breathe the same air. Look, they can have anything on the table. Fine. It's not mine. It's not theirs. They can help themselves to it. And you're like, oh, look, we're living in the same place. I'm not going to kick them out. Nobody's going to kick them out. We can share this place. There's plenty of space for both of us, especially if they're willing to live over there out of sight. Yeah. And it was just gradually stepping, like we realized actually there's a lot more room here, and progressively more and more. We might find at some point that the grudge that we were holding on to has become so diffuse that our mind steps over into the wholesome. And it's like, you know what? I don't want to be angry at you. I don't feel like nursing this anymore. I don't want to keep this going. And it's possible that, as the Buddha said, that unwholesome, unskillful thought could be abandoned. Yeah? This is this first strategy. Yeah? We find any wholesome thought, any wholesome line of thought, and we work with it. Yeah. We develop it, we nurture it, we stay in it, we abide in it, and gradually those unwholesome lines of thoughts will atrophy and fall away. And now, once we are in that wholesome line of thinking, we can actually make decisions about what we want to think about and trust that it's not us being controlling, being assertive, being dominant, being picky, being restless. It's just us deciding what to think based on the choices in front of us. And that allows us to continue developing wholesome lines of thought. And this is the first strategy expanded. Now, the second strategy is if we're thinking unwholesome thoughts, desire, hatred, and delusion are coming up, we might notice that they are unwholesome, unskillful, and we could examine the drawbacks of these thoughts. Yeah. See the ways that they lead to suffering, see that the ways that they're blameworthy, see the ways that they're unproductive for us. And the Buddha says it's like, suppose there was a young man or woman who was youthful and fond of adornments. They like jewelry. But if a carcass of a snake or a dog or a human body part were hung around their neck, they'd be horrified, repelled, and disgusted. Oh, I love the Buddha. But it's right on point. So I was trying to think of a way to modernize this a little, or at least to make a bit more sense, because I don't know if anybody has tried to. So maybe Rachel's actually had some experience with this. I've heard that with herding dogs, it's possible that a sheepdog might kill a sheep But there's a strategy actually to get them to stop doing that, to realize that it was bad, is the shepherd will take the carcass of that sheep and they will tie it to the dog's neck. And the dog won't be able to get away from it. The smell and the just the regret and the shame of what it did will be right there. And it'll carry it with it wherever it goes. And that this will be such a like an impactful experience for the dog to not be able to run away from the reality of what they did. And they'll feel such shame that they will never, ever again kill one of the sheep in the flock. And so this is where the simile comes from. Yeah. I sincerely doubt in the Buddhist time that they were tying dead animals to people's necks to get them to stop being so greedy for fancy jewelry. Yeah. But imagine I've never been interested in jewelry, but I'm projecting that this is what this like. Imagine you get a nice necklace, yeah, and you're so proud of the necklace, and you can't wait till you're going to go out to a fancy restaurant tonight with this necklace, and everybody's like, "Oh, it matches your hair, it matches your dress, it matches your such and such, it matches your eyes." I don't know. Again, I don't get it, but it's a thing. And you've got this nice necklace on, and then you're like, well, we've got a few minutes before we go to the restaurant, and you're cleaning out your fridge and you're dumping all of these spoiled leftovers into your trash can. And as you're leaning over the trash can to close the lid, the clasp comes undone on that necklace and it falls right there, right in all that semi-rotten food. Say you were to, of course it's expensive, and you reach in and you pull out that necklace and it's covered in slimy residue and mold and seven kinds of who knows what. It's probably not going to be your first inclination to put it back on, right? You're like, well, it matches my eyes. So it doesn't matter if it's slimy. It doesn't matter if it's smelly. I'm going to put it back on. That's just not how we work as people. You're going to look at that and you're like, oh, oh, this is terrible. This is awful. I hardly even want to touch it. And I got to hold it out here so that I don't smell it. And you're going to rush off to a sink and you're going to wash it. And then you're going to have to dry it. And it's only when it's completely clean, absolutely spotless, and completely dried off, and no lingering smell at all, that you might consider putting it back on. And this is the simile that the Buddha uses for these thoughts. Yeah. It might be that we're just so immersed in this thought. We're just so sure that that guy is the reason we're suffering. That guy is a jerk. He's destroying everything. And if he would just cease to exist, everybody would be happy. It would be a utopia. We're so sure of it. And we can't find a wholesome thought to land on. We can't figure out where's the opening for us to go to. In that case, just dealing with the thought we've got, we might reflect on the drawbacks. Yeah. We're like, okay, I can't seem to stop obsessing about this guy, but because I can't seem to stop, let's look at all of the ways that this is making me unhappy. It's making me angry. It's making me frustrated. It's making me tense. It's making me irritable and hard to relate to other people. It's getting in the way of all the wholesome things I could be doing. I don't feel like doing anything else. I don't feel like reading suttas or going to visit friends. It's just getting in the way of all these things. And by looking at all of these things, we can take this thought that we've been holding on to. It's like, I really love this grudge. And we'd be like, maybe I don't love it so much. Maybe this thing is actually a smelly, slimy, unattractive kind of thought. And if we can start to see it as a smelly, unattractive kind of thought, then we might actually be able to find an opening to let it down. We would be like, you know what? This is dumb. Why am I thinking this way? This is not productive. I think I'm going to stop. And it's entirely possible. And we might find that in our own practice, this is something that we can actually do and something that we can actually experience. That by looking at the drawbacks of this particular line of thought, that we talk ourselves out of it. And it might be, again, that through this process, that is how we find an opening that we couldn't see before. We're like, maybe I'm going to think about the opposite of. Maybe I'm going to think about, a good talk I heard. Maybe I'm going to think about, oh, this is so and so, did that, gave me that nice thing the other day. And we're like, okay, now I can do the first strategy. Now I can go and build on the wholesome until my mind is settled. And this is the second strategy. Now, the third strategy is assuming that the first two strategies haven't worked for us. We might try to intentionally forget and ignore those bad and unwholesome thoughts. Now, what does this say? Spiritual bypassing is such a, one of these up and coming phrases, but this is an actual strategy that we might try. We might just, okay, I'm going to try not to think these thoughts. These aren't productive. They're not working. I can't seem to intentionally let them go. Seeing the drawbacks doesn't work. Maybe I'm just going to stop thinking them. I'm going to pretend that they're not happening. And the Buddha says, suppose there was a person with clear eyes that can see sights, and some undesirable sights were in their range of vision. They might just close their eyes or look away. It's so obvious. But it sort of takes a fully enlightened Buddha to give us the permission to do it sometimes. If the other two strategies are not working for us, maybe just ignore the thoughts. Yeah. Like, that guy's a jerk. And you're like, yeah, maybe, okay, whatever. And you're like, I really need to get that new such and such technology. And you're like, whatever, okay, whatever. It'll still be there tomorrow if I really need it. And just intentionally try to not pay attention to that. Now, this is not going to be the fastest. It's not going to be the most directed. It's not going to be the most effective like those other two strategies. But if this is what we find, if I focus on this thing, the oppressive thoughts are going to take control and they are going to win. And there goes the afternoon. Well, in that case, maybe just ignore them. Yeah. Just try not to develop that line of thinking. Try not to pay attention to that thing that obsesses your mind when you pay attention to it. It's entirely possible that through this process, we might get some distance from the thing. We might forget the thing exists and find ourselves in reach of some wholesome line of thinking. And we might not know why we're so relieved to start thinking this wholesome line of thinking, and that's fine. We might not remember why we were so miserable an hour ago. That's fine, because we're intentionally trying not to dwell on the thing that was making us miserable. We're quite happy to have let it go, let it die, let it cease, and to start thinking wholesome things. And it might be, once our mind has gotten on the wholesome track, has developed the wholesome track, and we're settled, and we've got the beginnings of samadhi, we might actually be like, I seem to remember I was pretty miserable. What was I miserable about? We'd be like, oh, that thing. And maybe with the distance and with the buffer that this wholesome line of thinking provides us, we might be like, why was it that thing was just so engaging, so obsessing, that I couldn't let it go? And we might be able to start to develop that second strategy. We might be like, that was not a good thought. Now that I'm over here, I can see that that's a really dumb thought. I shouldn't be cultivating that. And we might be able to get some ammunition so that the next time, if we get caught by that thought, that thing, that perspective, that obsession, it'll be easier just to use the other two strategies. And this is the third strategy. Now, the fourth strategy is, suppose that the other three strategies are not working. What we might try is we might focus on stopping the formation of those thoughts. In doing so, the bad thoughts might be given up and come to an end. The Buddha says, suppose a person was walking quickly, and then they think to themselves, why am I walking so quickly? What if I were to slow down? So they'd start walking slower. Then they'd think, why am I walking slowly? What if I were to stand still? And then they'd stand still. After a while, they'd think, well, why am I standing? It'd be much easier if I sat down. And so they sit down. Then they're thinking, well, why am I why am I sitting? I'd be so much more comfortable if I lie down. So they lie down. And so that person would successively reject coarser postures to adopt more subtle and comfortable postures. Yeah. And this is the Buddha is saying, okay, look, ignorance is there at the top. And it might not be easy to, get out from under our selfish, restless, obsessed line of thinking. Yeah. Maybe we can't find any route of wholesome thinking to substitute in. Maybe none of our strategies are working and we're trying to shut it out. We're trying to focus on something else. And even that's not working. The Buddha said, okay, well, let's just pick up the mantra. Okay, slow down. Yeah. We know that we're not going to be able to stop this line of thinking, but at least we can slow it down. Yeah. Like, okay, I'm jumping to conclusions that guy's a jerk. He's the root of all evil. He's the reason I'm suffering. Slow down. Why am I thinking that? Okay, I'm thinking that because of this. Okay, great. This seems to be the reason that I think he's the root of all evil. Oh, and that. Yes, yes, yes. And that is the reason he's the root of evil. Oh, and that thing over there. Okay, yes, yes. Slow down, slow down. Let me write this down. Let me make sure I do that. I don't want to forget any of the reasons that this guy is so worthy of my hatred and my rage, right? Just give me a minute. Okay. And gradually we're going from a mile a minute, just thinking in these endless spirals that are completely exhausting and destructive to one grievance at a time, get in a line, present your case, just slow it down gradually. And as we do this, we'll be having less and less of this papancha going on, less and less of this one thought leading to this one thought leading to this one thought. If we've got less thoughts going on, we've got less of that happening. And gradually we're going to be able to get to a point where maybe, just maybe, we can be like, hey, look, that cloud over there is kind of funny. Anything we can do to distract ourselves, to get away from this line of thinking. Yeah. It might be that we slow it down to such a level that we can start to employ one of the other strategies. Yeah. Now, we didn't really actively, aggressively get rid of this line of thinking. But if we can get good at slowing it down, maybe we'll be able to just step out of it, just step to the side. Yeah. And while the first time I read that simile, I'm like, is the Buddha saying we should all just take a nap? It sounds like he's saying we should all just lay down and take a nap. It doesn't jive with this whole, energetic, until all of my blood dries up, I'm going to keep sitting kind of talk that he gives in the other suttas. But to be very specific, this is in the context of we're having an evil, unwholesome, detrimental thought. Yeah. Taking a nap actually would be better. Taking a nap might be fruitless, but it would not be destructive. Yeah. And that's the context in which this advice is given, which leads very nicely into the fifth and final strategy that we might employ. With teeth clenched and tongue pressed against the roof of our mouth, we could squeeze, squash, and crush our mind with mind. And doing so, the bad thoughts might be given up and come to an end. And I say might. I'll get to that in a minute. The Buddha says, it's like a strong man who comes along and grabs a weaker man by the head or by the throat or the shoulder and squeezes, squashes, and crushes them. He doesn't go any further with that. But I guess if this weaker, smaller man is, let's just say he's a really bad guy, then even if somebody were to come along and oppress that really bad guy to really take away his freedom, take away all of his authority, take away all of his money, take away all of his power, and just stand on the guy, that might be preferable. It might be one less atrocity in the world based on that. And that is, I guess, what we're reminding ourselves. If we can get out of this line of thinking by thinking a wholesome thought that's the strategy to use. If we can see the drawbacks and walk ourselves out of this line of thinking, we should do that. Even if it works to distract ourselves or to think about something else or to pick up a magazine and thereby get some space from this thing that's obsessing us, even that would be a better strategy. Um, and if that's not working, it's like slow down, take a nap, just really lock yourself in a closet and say, like, I will not send this person an angry text. I will not send this person an angry text. Do whatever you can to kind of get in the way and obstruct this line of thinking. And if none of that works, and we find that our finger is hovering over the send button, we should grab that hand away. We should toss the phone into the other room. We should lash ourselves to our chair and press our tongue against the roof of our mouth and go na 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 until these evil, unwholesome thoughts lose. And as we were saying last night at the tea time, there's only one instance where this will work. And this is relying on a peculiarity of the mind that comes out in the Honeyball Sutta or actually in Majjhima Nikaya 19, where the Buddha is talking about the two kinds of thoughts. He alludes to the fact that thinking is the basic sense mind kind of thinking that our brain does, that we feel in our body, is actually in our body. It's an actual physical kind of thinking, and it requires blood, and it requires chemical signals, and it requires electricity. When we are using that kind of thinking, it actually takes energy. And it is entirely possible that if we meet that that sense-based mind, that it just won't let go of this, with another sense-based mind that is equally physical, that our determination might win out. And our intentional, I am not going to think these thoughts, I am not going to think these thoughts, I am not going to think these thoughts, might exhaust that obsession. If it is rooted in the body, if it is rooted in a physical mental process, sort of like a chemical addiction or an addiction to thinking, an addiction to anger, an addiction to greed, an addiction to confusion and laziness and cloudiness. If it is physical mind versus physical mind, it is entirely possible we might be able to just grab that line of thinking by the shoulders, give it a good shake, and force it to sit down and just keep it there until it ebbs away, until it is no longer strong enough to obsess our mind. And if we have the determination to do this, this is preferable than acting on those evil, unskillful, unwholesome thoughts. Yeah. So it's a last ditch effort. But if this is what we're stuck with, yeah, if we really want to get free from this particular line of thinking or any speech or actions that might come from this line of thinking, we can always just tie ourselves to our chair and not get up until the line of thinking is gone. Yeah? We can really win in a battle of mind versus mind, because the funny thing is, we're only capable of thinking one thing at a time. It seems not. It seems like we get free of the thinking and then immediately it's coming back. It seems like it never went anywhere. Yeah. It's like, oh, I just got over this and here we are again. We're going through it again. But what doesn't go away immediately is the mood of the mind, the feelings associated with a particular mental state, the overarching perceptions that led to those thoughts. These things have some stability to them. They dictate what kind of thoughts we're having. And so even if we're able to get away from some of the thoughts, that mood might still be there. Yeah. So it might take a bit of effort. It might take a bit of working our way through the strategies to get free from that mood, which will drag us right back into these thoughts. Yeah. It might take time to kind of step us completely into the realm of the wholesome, where we don't have any lingering selfishness, we don't have any lingering greed, hatred, or delusion, we don't have any lingering hindrances. that are feeding just one thought to the next, the next. Yeah. And these are the 5 strategies. This is the Buddha says. What is the name of this sutta? It's How to Stop Thinking, as Bhante Suchatto's name for the Sutta Majjhima Nikaya 20. So I offer these 5 strategies for you in brief and in detail. And hopefully, if the Buddha's way of doing it, where you just divide things into categories and decide, I'm going to think only wholesome thoughts from now on, if that's not working for you, maybe one of these strategies can help you the next time you're stuck. And if nothing else, Majjhima Nikaya 20. Just, when you're in a rough spot, go to the books, bring it up, go back through the list, and maybe that will be the thing that gets your mind off of the thing that you're obsessed with. Yeah? And so on this full moon night, I offer this for your reflection.